I customized this dollhouse kit with handmade details in cheap and easy lighting. This is a 1/44 scale kit, which is a dollhouse for a dollhouse size. The completed dollhouse is only 2.5 inches tall. I got started by painting all the pieces of the main house. I painted the laser cut windows and the window grills white. I used a marker to color the front door. If I was doing this again, I would use watered down brown paint instead to stain the wood so the laser cut details would still be visible. I cut the wooden tabs to remove the window frames and stuck them to some tape to paint the edges. While the glue is still wet, I'm using a straight board to make sure the windows are level. For my first customization, I'm using some trash plastic to add glass to the windows. I'll be adding lights inside of the house, so I'm sanding the plastic to diffuse the light and make it harder to see inside. The plastic looks pretty rough, so I'm coating it with some Mod Podge to make it look more clear again. My gloss Mod Podge is not in good shape, so please pardon my chunks. Up close, you can see my fingers clearly, but with some distance it becomes blurry. This is a trick I learned from Bentley House Minis. I cut a piece of plastic, leaving space on the left and right so I can glue the walls together later. I'm gluing the plastic down with the sanded side facing in. I added the trash plastic glass to all of the rest of the windows. I only painted one side of this thin wood and added more moisture with the glue so some of the pieces warped. I weighed them down to straighten them out. I'm using a free marble sample, some 123 blocks, and this heavy piece of metal I found on the sidewalk. It seems to have worked, but you'll see that the warp comes back later and I have to fix it a different way. For my second custom detail, I used caviar beads as doorknobs. I attached them with white glue. I'm using some Mod Podge to add some shine to the door and also help keep the tiny beads attached. There are always lots of leftover wood scraps from these miniature kits, and I'm using some of it to make window boxes. I sanded the piece so it's not as deep and cut 2 small window boxes. Since these window boxes are so small, all I need to do is cut a flat piece of wood instead of making a box with 4 sides and a bottom. Working at such a small scale can be tricky, but details like this are so simple since you can barely see them. The flower boxes are still too deep and sticking off the house too much, so I'm shaving them down. I've collected lots of flowers and flocking, mostly from eBay and my local dollhouse store. I'm making the flower boxes look like they're overflowing with blooms by gluing them to the top. I got this purple and other colors in a 1980s mini shrubbery kit. The plastic is so old it cracks and breaks every time I open them. To make it look more realistic, I'm mixing in some green flocking as well so it looks like there are flowers and leaves in the window boxes. I'm adding some more colors from the 1980s shrubbery kit. I glued the 4 main pieces of the house together and realized the walls were still warped. To fix this little gap, I marked a piece of scrap wood from the kit at the same width as the wall and glued it in between the peaks. If you don't have a clamp, you can use some tape to hold it together as it dries. I used spray paint to color all the pieces that make up the greenhouse and the front porch. I used more trash plastic to add glass to the greenhouse. I painted the pieces of the greenhouse on the front and back. I used a scrap of cardstock to add a floor to the greenhouse. This is another custom detail. I'm cutting scrap wood from the kit to be the same length as the inside wall of each side of the greenhouse. I'm mixing flocking with glue and adding some green so it looks like leaves. I'm using forest moss from the Dollar Tree to make it look like there are climbing vines inside of the greenhouse. The greenhouse covers this little window on the side, and I didn't want this detail to go to waste. Whenever I make a miniature kit, I stash any pieces I may be able to use later. I didn't have any plans for it at the time, but I find a use for it in this build and I really love how it turns out. The kit includes this rectangle of wood for displaying the house, but I'm transforming mine into a table. I'm using 1/12 scale stair spindles and some scrap wood. I'll be adding lots of moisture to this tabletop later, so for some insurance I glued popsicle sticks to the underside to prevent warping. To square up the corners and make it strong, I used these 90-degree scrap pieces from miniature kits. To light up my project, I'm using these fairy lights I got from Amazon. Each of these strands has 20 bulbs and is about 80 inches long. That's too much for my needs, so I'm giving it the chop. I cut off 9 bulbs and it still works. Later I'll hide the battery pack under the table and string the lights up through the dollhouse. I painted the tabletop green, although I changed it later, and now I'm adding a foundation to the house. It looks unnatural for a house to be sitting directly on the lawn, so I'm using foam core to add some elevation. I'm creating textured paint so the foundation looks like concrete. I'm using some really fine sand, glue, and some gray paint. I'm using too much glue to attach the house to the foundation. Since I'm adding light to the inside, I want to make sure that none of the light leaks out around the base. Once all of this glue dried, I painted it black for more insurance. While the foundation dries, I'm using some scalloped scissors to make some small scale shingles for the roof. The roof pieces are flat and boring, so adding these shingles is a great way to add texture. I'm attaching the first row by leaving the scallop overhanging the edge. I'm staggering the rest of the rows as I go. The shingles are made from printer paper, so it's pretty weak. I'm strengthening the overhang by adding some wood glue. When this dries, it'll be nice and hard and protect the edges. I intentionally left overhang for this small piece and glued it to a popsicle stick. I'm using this little scrap as my test piece for coming up with a paint scheme. I started by painting all of the shingles gray. mixed other colors into the base color to create additional shades. To create variation in the roof, I painted random shingles these different colors. I painted all the roof pieces this way and made a cap piece using a strip of paper. Before I attach the roof, I'm installing the lights. I'm cutting through the foundation and the tabletop so I can string my lights up into the dollhouse. Whenever you're installing lights, it's a good idea to keep testing that they still work. I'm taping the wire to the tabletop and making sure there are no lights below where I'll be attaching the battery pack. I'm using Velcro so the battery pack is easily removable later if I need to replace the batteries. If you don't have Velcro, you could just use hot glue and easily pop it off later and then reattach it. Now that the string lights are through the tabletop, I'm putting them up inside of the dollhouse. The LED bulbs are attached to thin flexible wire. I'm twisting the wire around itself so I can fit it into such a small space. I added lights to each room, checking them throughout and making sure there weren't light bulbs in awkward places. Once I was happy with the position of the lights, I glued the foundation to the tabletop. Once it was dry, I glued down the roof pieces. The kit includes this laser cut gingerbread molding for the top of the roof. I wanted to modernize the house, so I used the piece of paper instead, but I will add it to the top of the greenhouse. The kit includes pieces to make a front porch, but my flower boxes are in the way. The original porch step is too short since I made a foundation, so I added a smaller square for a second step. I didn't like how square the stairs were, so I'm replacing them using a couple different sizes of popsicle sticks. To make the steps look like granite or some other type of stone, I painted them gray and added some speckled white paint. I glued a little piece of paper underneath the steps to give them some height, so when I add the grass, it won't bury the bottom step. I'm adding exterior lights to the house using small clear beads that don't have a hole. To make the top part look like a shade and the bottom look like the bulb, I'm just painting half of it black with acrylic paint. I'm scavenging some tiny printed numbers from this packaging for the front of the house. I really like the texture on the foundation and the tiny bead lights. I'm using some egg carton to make a walkway to the front door. Egg carton is really thick for 1/44 scale, so I peeled off a few layers and now I'm cutting rectangular and square stones. I'm sprinkling green flocking onto the wet glue so it doesn't dry clear and look awkward. I used some more forest moss and flocking to make some vines climbing on the greenhouse. I don't know what this plant is, but it always comes in handy for me. I used the same dry plant folded into a ball to make a round shrub. For a bit more added realism, I'm adding some dirt around the base of all the shrubbery out front and back to make it look like they're actually in flower beds. I think this would have looked better if I had used darker dirt or used coffee grounds. Before I add the full lawn, which will require a lot of moisture, I'm gluing the tabletop to the base to prevent it from warping. I came up with an idea for these unused porch pieces and the window grill. This is the piece I removed because it would have been hidden by the greenhouse. I glued the 3 pieces together and I'm painting them white so they look like a miniature gazebo. The glue on the base is dry, so I'm using some white glue to attach to the lawn. I mixed some brown into the vibrant green so the color would be more realistic. I'm sprinkling the flocking on and using my finger to pat it down into the glue. In the area below the gazebo, I'm sprinkling some dirt to make it look like the lawn has worn down a little bit from people walking through it. I'm spraying the flocking with rubbing alcohol to help the glue penetrate. This is just watered down white glue. You can see how much moisture I'm adding to the top of the table, which is why I wanted it glued down to the legs before performing this step. The rectangle frame of the legs is helping prevent this piece from warping. While the glue is still wet, I'm sprinkling on some more flocking and sand. Once it's completely dry, I'll brush away anything that didn't stick. I was planning to use one of these dried plants as a tree on the right side of the lawn, but I think it covers too much of the greenhouse. Instead, I'm using some bits and pieces to make a miniature fountain. I started by tracing a circle onto some cardstock. I wrapped the cardstock strip around a pencil to form a circle. This circle glued to cardstock forms the base of the fountain. You could also use these techniques to make a miniature graduation cap. I'm trimming this broken plastic manure to make the center of the fountain. I'm using a brass bead cap as the top part of the fountain where water will flow down into the base. I added a layer of hot glue to the plastic centerpiece to make it thicker. The fountain is really smooth and I want to give it texture, so I'm adding a layer of glue followed by fine sand. The combo of wood glue and sand makes all of the different materials I used blend together. I glued the pieces together prematurely, so I pulled them apart to prep for painting and adding water. I don't want to lose all the texture from the sand, so I'm painting everything a light base color and then dry brushing with a darker gray. I'm using UV resin as water and it doesn't have any color, so I'm painting the look of the water inside of the fountain. I'm using strips of plastic wrap to make it look like there's water flowing from the top of the fountain into the base. I'm using white glue to attach the plastic. I trimmed the excess plastic and glued the stream of fake water into the base. I coated each of the plastic waterfalls with UV resin and cured them. UV resin is toxic until it's cured, so wear rubber gloves and cure any excess resin on your tools or napkins before disposing of it in the trash. My little plastic waterfalls are invisible to the naked eye, so I'm painting really tiny streaks of white on them to make it look like moving water. I am digging through my lawn to make a space to glue the fountain. In retrospect, I think it would have looked really cool to make some egg carton stones around the fountain, like it's sitting on a patio or surrounded by a walkway. I'm using some thin wooden scraps from a miniature kit to make a tiny mailbox. I attached 3 tiny pieces of wood together to make the post of the mailbox. I'm using a matchstick to make the mailbox. It's too big as it is, so I'm shaving it down and sanding it to make it into a mailbox shape. Just like a real-life mailbox, it's flat on the bottom and rounded at the top. I'm coloring some printer paper with a red Sharpie on the front and the back. This took several attempts, but I used just some small sharp scissors to cut an extremely tiny flag for the mailbox. I used a dental pick tool to scrape away the grass and make a small hole to glue the mailbox into.